everybody. Gigi here for KTLK The Fringe FM. This is Shift Happens. Do follow us on Twitter at Shift Happens Pod. You can follow Cortana at Empress Cortana. You can follow me, Gigi, at GGRabbit1. You can catch our archives over at Spreaker. That's Spreaker.com. Search for Shift Happens and we will pop right on up. Man, what a crazy hectic week it has been. We wanted to get this out sooner, but you know what? Shift happens. And so, we got this out as quick as we could. Now, as you probably know, this episode is our part 2 with Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And you know what? We all know he's a genius, but I've been talking with him quite a lot outside of the show over these last few weeks, just kind of hanging out with him on the phone. And he's sent me some of his articles he's written, some of his documents, and as well as some of his work that has yet to be published. Yes, I've gotten a little sneak peek of a few things, and man, I've got to say, if this man does not win a Nobel Prize by the time his work is done here, then that's, that just means there's something really wrong with this world, because some of this stuff is truly, I've had several different, you can almost call them epiphanies of knowledge through reading some of his research, and some of it goes back to the 70s. All the way up till now. This guy's just pumping epic stuff out all the time, and I can't encourage you enough to go check out some of his books, go follow his website, follow his articles and where they're published, and just indulge. I'm telling you, it's very, there's just so much to it, and it's so crucial, and that's definitely a part of the reason why, that's a big reason why we're having him on for this, at least 3-part series, because there's just so much to get out to you guys, and we really, it is important, and it is very fascinating. So, I don't want to take up too much time up front. We're just going to throw you guys right in there. So, real quick, this episode and all episodes are brought to you by Ether Vape. Just go to ethervape.com. That's AETHERVAPE.com. Go to the shopping cart, enter the promo code SHIFT, and you will save yourself 25% off of the dankest e-juice on the market, son. Also, you will get free shipping on all orders over $20, and you will get a free bottle of e-juice of your choice with your first purchase. All right, Doc Ram, Part 2. Let's go.
Some of them escaped going into lower caverns. But the reason we're probably not talking German now is because probably they ran into something down there that stopped that nonsense. I noted that they were bringing a discovery of possibly an ancient alien base that had been built as a hideout during an intergalactic war. I don't know. What I do know is that just this last week, there's been a major evacuation of all civilians, and some serious military has been moved in. I have no idea what it means yet.
Interesting.
Wow.
Okay, see, one thing is, now when
something's going on that isn't very cool. That's probably most likely. And we probably didn't get along, and now we may have the 1%ers are in trouble, probably. And we'll see how this all plays in the media. I don't know how it'll go.
Yeah, and for the listeners, the first little bit of that got cut out. But yeah, there's an evacuation going on in Antarctica, and you mentioned that. During your trip down there some time ago, you saw ruins, Viking ruins under the
Yeah,
ground.
from a 14th century, there were Vikings. So that Antarctica has been used for a long time. I have a friend that runs, he 42 years, who's head of the Brazilian Secret Service, Madi Barbarella. Barbarella told me that there was an island just off Brazil where they would stage to go in, and they did that frequently. It was a well-known news thing that the Germans were using that as another base. They always wanted to the Yule Thul Club, some of the other things, ancient and forgotten technologies. Like that's what the military used me for. We knew about aliens in the work I was doing with Navy, but we were more worried about the Russians at that time, and that's where I spent most of my time, was studying paranormal phenomena. For example, the whirling dervish and ghost dance can change space-time using body movement and dance. There's a woman that does that now, Gabriel Roth, that is quite interesting. And you can see, I'm going to write this in my non-local mind book, there is a video on the internet called Meetings with Remarkable Men. It's a Gurdjieff movie that they have whirling dervish that in the dance scenes where there 17 of them are doing a cadence exactly like a rodent coil. Casimir effect.
Wow,
3, 6, 9 cadence.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, that is fascinating how you can, just in the same way you can reach an altered state of consciousness through the help of psychedelics or perhaps meditation, that there are ways to achieve those states through dance.
And not only dance, but sound. Part of the Bibles was the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, relating sound to words. And that was a technology that was, like Gabriel blowing his horn. That was like a thing that happened back then that we don't know about now. We know that sound, like in cymatics and crop circles, can have an effect that will leave sacred geometry or unusual patterns. But that's Roger Penrose, what they call the geometric universe. There's something about resonances and the way you scale from one subsystem to another.
Yeah, and I believe I think I've heard you mention before that you actually have a few, 3 in particular, unpublished books that delve a lot into this. I think one of them may have been called The Diamond Body.
Yes, there were 3 books I wrote that were the studies I did after we did the Menninger Foundation and biofeedback. I then started studying video feedback, and there were 3 books that came out of that Jeremy Tarcher, at that time he was Tarcher Publishing, he's now Penguin, said that the world wasn't ready for. Basically, there was the diamond body, electromagic, and yogatronics. And in the yogatronics, you can, Norman Spinrad did, a friend of mine that wrote a science fiction story called Little Heroes, where you had the thing called the wire, and you would put it on your head, dial it in, and you could change your sex for like a costume. Just talking to neurotransmitters, specific neurotransmitters. You could change things. There was a joke going around at the time that, this one group of aliens were studying man because they couldn't figure out how we could exist as a life form when the difference between being psychotic and normal could be measured in micrograms.
Wow.
It's a pretty fine tune out there between sanity and insanity, Criminal Minds and the rest of it.
Yeah, there really is, and one thing that you mentioned in some of those unpublished works is the ability to use sound and light to replicate the effects of pharmaceutical drugs, and
yes, you can do that. That's, in fact, what you're doing is actually talking to a neurotransmitter. And if you can talk to one neurotransmitter, that neurotransmitter can translate to 3 other different kinds of translators to other neurotransmitters, which means you had a way in and you could start talking to neurotransmitters. When someone takes lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, that's a toxin. And what happens is that the body freaks out and overproduces lysergic acid amide, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain that is associated with connecting dots when you go, aha. That's what's released. And if you can release that naturally, you can, in a sense, create creativity. And that is reality.
Wow.
Basically, LSD is out of the body within, 2 hours, and the resulting 26 hours of psychedelic hallucinations is your body, your response to your own body's chemistry release. And basically, to taking LSD or the dimethyltryptamine or some of these other neurotransmitters is to, in fact, jumpstart your brain in its own productions. And so once you do that, you become more, creative. There was a study at Harvard on that in 1964 when LSD was still legal. And it was in 65 that Andrew Weil, that toad, got Leary kicked out and LSD on the Uniform Controlled Substance Act. But back then in 64, Harvard was studying it and wanted to know what would happen if they gave it to a genius. And they did a study where a group of kids, me, I was one of them in Seattle, others in different parts, where Leary came out and actually talked to my mom and then talked to my professor. I was 20 at Washington State University, and came out and actually talked.
They did this at UW? Whoa.
What's that?
They did that at UW? Wow.
Yeah, well, what happened, I took my first hit of LSD in 64. I'd never even heard of it, or hallucinogens back then, pot, nothing. And what happened was I was up in Deception Pass looking down Hurricane Ridge, straight down into Puget Sound, about 2,000 feet. And the colors were boiling back. And Leary leaned over and he said to me, "Wouldn't it be neat to jump?" And that's where I discovered, kind of creepy. What happened is I noted all these doors slamming shut in my brain where I didn't want to go there. And I became fascinated with altered states of consciousness. And that has led me to my studies in magic, because magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. It is a higher form of physics with a mystery school. And it was basically reserved for the ultra elite of Europe for centuries. That's what Lodge is about. And so I believe that there is going to be a major change in physics shortly, and that magic will come out of physics, much like chemistry has come out of alchemy.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of technology you can really consider as magic, and I'm wondering if, back then when they, in one fell swoop, basically made all psychedelics illegal, I mean, why do you think they really did that? Do you think that was some sort of attempt to keep the exclusivity of psychedelics within these mystery schools around I mean, why would they not? No. Basically, it was because they couldn't make money off it. It was so simple to make. You can get it from morning glory seeds and baby Hawaiian wood rose that it was like marijuana. They just classified as dangerous. So they couldn't tax it. We'll make it illegal. And then we'll make our money that way, like Clinton and some of the others. Clinton was one of the biggest cocaine dealers in the world. He has a bridge down there in Arkansas. It's I have no idea that at the time that our country had been hijacked when I was working military. I was a true blue thinking I was really doing the right thing. And boy, did I wake up. It's kind of embarrassing now to realize that this is no longer the country I served or protected.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in that whole awakening. In fact, could we get into your early work with the military? And then what led you up to this awakening?
Oh, what led me? I had no clue. At the time I came out of graduate school, of course, I'm a physicist, so the first thing I did was come home and work for Boeing, and like everybody does. And I remember when they lost the B-1 contract and 30,000 PhDs hit the street in one day. And they had a big sign saying, "With the last person out of town, please turn off the lights." And Jerry Pollack at the University of Washington hired me within the first week of being laid off at Boeing. And that's when I started anesthesiology. I had top secret clearance, all permits, and that's when I got contacted by SEAL Corporation and then MRU. That was all because of Dr. Stanley Krippner, my mentor from 1970. I had written a paper on Carolean photography, and he brought me back to New York and introduced me to Edgar Mitchell, and that allowed me to be at Mission Control in 1971 that did the ESP studies for the military, and that's the ESP induction that I wrote for Nick Begich, his publishing house. And I go back. Ed's died just recently. He was my friend. He was really my friend, and someone that I cared about. He was smart. He was doing what he did, and he was ahead of his time. What we basically did is hijack NASA. We had an opportunity to really study extrasensory perception with long distances to see if it was time-related or a speed like light, and or objects like going between the Earth and the Moon. And we did those studies with James Hurtak and Ed, Pirikos, several others. And then Dr. Milan Riesel defected from Czechoslovakia, and I was the one that debriefed him in Seattle. I have those actual tape recordings when I sat on the ground and he sat in my couch, and I debriefed him on his studies that led me to write the book and then train astronauts.
Wow. Now, okay, so let's take it in this direction. So
I didn't know they were military at the time. Basically, when you're working physics, you don't. Back then, Vietnam was a bad thing. I graduated from high school in '62, and half my graduating class didn't even come back from Vietnam. And when I say that, we weren't even in the war at that time. We were advisors working tunnels. That's the way it played. And I was lucky. I went to graduate school, and when I came out of graduate school, there they were, waiting for me.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure the fact that you built your own linear accelerator and demonstrated
Well, yeah, that's why old man DuPont hired me on the spot, brought me back to Wilmington, Delaware, where I worked out of the research station there and lived in Newark, and then did graduate work at Newark in solid-state physics, because I was going to be an astronaut. And what happened is that they shorted me off into solid-state physics. I worked under R.B. Murray, who had a Nobel Prize on that. And I tell you, it's interesting because at that time, nobody understood forbidden zones. They're very similar to what Jerry Pollack calls exclusion zones, except that water is 1,000,000, that's 6 zeros, more efficient than gallium arsenide, which is the solid-state physics chips that we do. When you take two metals or anything, water and something, the interface between the two change. That is the nature of cavitation, where one membrane touches another and what happens between them in the exchange of information. And that is resonant cavity oscillators.
Okay, now let's take a step back. Now let's explain to the audience, going back to you collaborating with the MRU. Now, let's explain who Dr. Carl Schleicher is and who he was to you, and the work you did with him, and how that all inevitably kind of led to the TV show, The X-Files, and how they actually consulted with you.
Yeah. Dr. Carl Schleicher. Yeah, Dr. Carl Schleicher was Air Force. He was a full-bird colonel that worked for the Navy Intel out of Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C. And he was probably an alien because he was at that desk for 40 8 years. He was known as the smoking man. He was involved with anything creepy. That's what he did. When nobody else could figure it out, they would bring in A-Team. And pretty soon, he did Montauk, East Coast. At some point, he needed to expand, and I was offered position after I had done my work with SEALs. I was offered Northwest Regional Director of MRU, and I handled everything paranormal on the West Coast. That's how I got to meet Andrea Puharich at where was it, down there at Sanford Research Institute. I was at China Lake, Livermore at Argonne, and other places, and the Boeing Scientific Research Laboratories, which later became in South Park, that later became the Space Center in Kent. And I my dad worked there, and then they had me doing major paranormal. When they had something creepy going on and nobody could figure out what it was, that's when they would bring me in on the West Coast. My counterpart was Bill Franklin, with Dr. Wilbur Franklin at Kent State, that worked out of the University of Chicago. Those laboratories were underground, have a vault permit badge kind of thing, and I did some alien studies or artifacts there for Bill because he didn't have the academic background I did. They had a what appeared to be a UFO metal, that chain. What I did is I fired a 50 caliber cannon at it and went up close to look under electron microscope for lattice damage, and there was none. It was 100 times stronger than diamond. We now have that in our bag with fullerenes and buckyball carbon, C60 and C120. But back then, that didn't exist. And when I didn't even understand how it worked. It was a different kind of bonding.
So and real quick, let's pause right here because this is one of the more interesting artifacts that you've talked about that was presented to you, and so just to give people a picture of how this is happening. I mean, they're not telling you where this is from. They're not giving you any information about it.
No, they don't give you any disclosure because they want you to go in pure and try to figure it out for yourself. Yeah. So I didn't know where it came from. The scuttlebutt was that it had come from an object out of the Florida Everglades, not Roswell. Yeah. And but the material was really weird because when you fired the bullet at it, it wrapped itself around the bullet like foil, and then like water, it was weird paranormal. It was electrophoresis, and that means it was a superconductor and at normal room temperature, and it was very interesting material. I had no idea where it went after I studied it. It was there at the UW at Chicago underground.
And
physics.
it was some sort of, you've described it as looking like almost an aluminum foil sort of metal, but at the same time, with all of the tools you had at your disposal, you were not able to pinpoint exactly what kind of metal it was. It's certainly nothing.
No, it was. Yeah, I couldn't. I had a Carey spectrophotometer, and I could do measurements with sampling scopes down in the nanometer region, nanoseconds. That means 10 to the minus 9. Rise times in electronics, 10 to the minus 6. But my thesis at Delaware required measuring variations on lattice with excitation emission to VK center luminescence at 4.2K. And that was, Tektronix had invented a sampling scope that sent out 2 pulses simultaneously, but they were spaced, measured approximately in one nanosecond apart, and so you did a sampling between the two, and you could actually measure rise times and excitation emission. That's when you hit it with a light and then it luminesces to a lattice defect like a VK center or something like that. And that was my master's. And so when I was going into this thing, I was as good as it gets in the physics, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I didn't figure out a lot of things back then because that's what we did mostly, catch flies. Our mouth was open in disbelief. I have seen things, I still don't know quite what they mean.
So that piece of metal in particular, I mean, essentially, I guess you could say it had it was similar as far as the properties go of what we know today as fullerene nanotubes, but this is back before we had any idea.
Well, it wasn't a nanotube because it wasn't carbon. I would have easily identified it as such. Carbon has it bonds to itself, which means you can have one atom thick surface and have sheets of it. And I have a demonstration of their creating these very thin sheets of carbon that flow in the air like with the current of the air, and yet they're harder than diamond. When you take 60 carbons, they will form a ball, and that later became known as the buckyball, and 120 carbon atoms. So you have what they call C60 and C120 fullerenes. The actual space between on the C60 is 1.4 nanometers, and what happened recently when I got slammed and hacked and all the rest of it was they were trying to stop me from publishing articles. If you put exclusion zone water inside a fullerene buckyball, that would be H3O2. What happens is that you now have a super antioxidant for radiation. This was developed out of Ukraine. I published in and reproduced in Russia and offered to Japan. They turned it down. What happens is they gave lethal doses of radiation to rats, fed it fullerene water, and 95% survived, because what it does is it just goes in to special isotopes and things, and it just antioxidants. It wraps itself up and isolates it, stops the radiation damage.
Yeah, and the fact that, Japan denied this.
But there's something more. The second paper I wrote is instead of putting fullerene water inside exclusion zone water, if you put deuterium inside it, now what you had is a controlled thermonuclear fusion bomb. And the way you ignited it was Lockheed's teleportation laser, that the trigger was developed at Carnegie Mellon, and probably was part of the 9/11 experiments when Building 7 came down and that 617-foot steel beam was falling in free fall. Yeah. And when I talked to Judy on that, Judy Wood, and basically there's only one thing in the universe that will vaporize steel, and that's a plasma. And that is what we're talking about, which means a nanofiber carbon could be put into an aircraft and triggered remotely with a laser, and there's no forensics. And that's what they tried to stop. Once that paper was out, they left me alone because it was already a done deal. I had my computer wiped by people coming into my home and trying to stop me from publishing that. That's how zealot some of these research facilities are. They're actually good universities and bad universities, and you know which ones have the brutes and what we call toads and henchmen that go out and enforce their.
It sounds like it's its own little cult, With
there's Lockheed itself. Has developed a teleportation laser that now does not need encryption, and you can't break it. You can be very selective in how you transmit that information. And the trigger for how to trigger that deuterium, what you have is a controlled thermonuclear fusion in a controlled bomb with the precision of 1.4 nanometers. That weapon is now being deployed as a tactical nuke everywhere. And Gaza, Golan Heights, and Russia just last week. So there it is. I don't know what I know, but what I do know, I know real well. And the fullerene, it was a breakthrough. That material, the bonding of carbon is, and especially when you start layering it like you do, there's nothing can break that. It's like 100 times stronger than diamond.
Yeah, and that's why perhaps, aren't they using these fullerene nanotubes? That's part of the idea of how they're building what we're calling a space elevator. Now,
yeah, that's what that will be. That was in my paper. That is exactly what Japan is doing right now. That fiber that will go up to the space station like an elevator.
So
that's because it's strong enough that it won't break with the whipping of gravity as it whips around.
So what would it look like? If you walked up to a space elevator, what does that material look like? Is it translucent, or does it look like?
No, it'll be it's carbon, and so it will have like all carbon in different stages or isomers, isotopes. It'll be not isotopes. Allotropic forms. It will be transparent. It will be solid. Predicated on what else it's got with it. Carbon is an unusual element, and because it bonds to itself just naturally. That means you can form nanosheets of it. And then you layer those, and now you have something very interesting. And if you form the nanotubes, they're like microtubules in your body. And that probably, by the way, where the soul resides, is in structured water inside a nanotube. That's what I'm writing about right now, tonight.
So to try to conceptualize what a space elevator would really be, I mean, what are we talking about?
It would be like a flexible tube or a hose connected from the Earth all the way up to something in orbit that is out far enough that it's in a circular orbit around the Earth.
So how fast are we talking as far as being lifted from Earth to the moon, let's say? Like how long?
3 to 12 years.
Okay, that's what I thought.
We'll be there in 3 to 12 years, yeah. They already have the material. Now they're figuring out how to mass produce it enough they can make that elevator happen. And because once it's done, it will not break.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly more than reliable. It just seems like, 3 to 12 years is probably not as fast as we would like it to be, and I wouldn't be surprised if they already have something under wraps to speed up that process. But now, okay, so I want to real quick. We're gonna change gears in a minute here, but real quick. So when it comes to space outside of these space elevators, when it comes to space exploration, we're led to believe publicly that the technology that we have at our disposal is still strapping people to a firecracker and blasting it off. Now, I feel like since the 60s and 70s...
That's an interesting way of looking at SpaceX.
I mean, that's really what we're...
Call it good. Pipe bombs are us. That's what I was doing when I was 12 years old. Chemcraft. Yeah, pipe bombs are us.
That's how ridiculous it is, though. And when you think about it, think about any other form of technology that existed in the 60s or 70s, whether it's computers, televisions, telephone communications, anything. Everything has progressed.
Well, we had different communication systems that you're not even familiar with now called synthetic telepathy. Man has another communication device. That's what I learned when I met Krill at Broom Lake. I couldn't figure out how she could be inside my head. How's she doing that? It turns out the temporal lobes will, at 0.3 to 3 gigahertz, that's Alan Frey's work at Willow Grove, will cause the temporal lobes to ring, and now you can heterodyne all kinds of information on that, including voice in sound region. And you can hear it inside your head, and it didn't go through your ears. And that's how that is the weapon of choice now that's used before any ordnance is dumped on a world like Afghanistan. When we went into Afghanistan, it has, these jets, those bombs, this firecracker, and that rifle. But at the very top was Commander Solo, a single aircraft that had 58 computers and a algorithm to produce what's called cloning motions. And I've written a technical paper on that, on synthetic telepathy and all the different previous things before that. And that's one technology that's now used a lot. You can make a weapon using a microwave and the rain gutters and hassle your neighbors. No problem. Yeah, another anarchist cookbook. That's what I'm talking about. But
well, we've got some annoying neighbors right now, partying all night. But anyway,
well, here's
I want
the
to give
deal.
me ideas.
If you use subliminals, now you can fake it to the point where you can't tell whether it's your thought or something external. And that's why we don't have free will, we have true will. You have a responsibility, not a right, to for the thoughts you choose to entertain.
Well, and
whether you got those creepy thoughts from your parents, like being a pedophile, or you've got someone down the street trying to program you, you don't have to go there. That's the purpose of meditation, training the mind and learning how to control your thoughts. And if you have a thought that isn't appropriate, pornography, whatever, you can push it away. It comes back, you push it away, and at some point, like all habits, you can control and change behavior.
Well, see, and
what I've noticed in the importance of the will within the vast majority of magical practices throughout, I guess, the centuries is
that's why all saints in history have stressed, throughout history, have stressed the importance of meditation, training the mind. The upper brain is there to make all your beliefs true. It's your gut that is the first brain, the enteric nervous system, where everything starts. And that's a future talking to your present to move you toward purpose over intent.
Well,
you learn how to listen to your gut. Now you can make your mission, for example, like a Navy SEAL, your purpose, and you can't fail by definition.
Okay, now that's an interesting point, but real quick.
This is why, and we were doing this back in the 70s. We had biofeedback, so that we had a single gain amplifier that was built by Jan Hoover of J&J Enterprises on Bainbridge Island that later became John Fluke. And that single gain amplifier allowed a signal to noise ratio of 10 to the minus 6, which allowed us to measure brainwaves. And now we had a way to build polygraphs and to train SEALs on how to interrogate and be interrogated. Control heart rate, pulse, respiration. You have no idea. It's the importance of that.
And I guess
there were other power tools I did, but that was the one. I was
going to say power tools. Yeah. So I guess.
Yeah. Well, see, the first protocol, SEAL Unit 1, was chosen on extrasensory perception. We tested them, and we were looking for intuition. We could build steroids and train them how to make a pipe bomb. What we wanted was somebody that was instinctually aware, and that's mostly EQ women. But a SEAL, there are individuals, and it turns out that everybody has it. It is about your belief system of ignoring these inputs and rethinking things to the point where you overthink. And basically, it's the first thought that comes in your head that's always the correct one.
Exactly.
It's not a second thought. It is always the first thought.
Exactly. And, some people would say that, when it comes to especially something like interrogation, there's two schools of thought as far as information that one might be withholding. So neurolinguistics,
that's when we had Bandler and Spangler coming in, so you could read someone's body language and the shifting of the eyes. You can tell when someone's lying by the way their eyes move.
Oh yeah, well there's that too, but there's also the thought that one of two things: either one, that an individual has information that is actually stored in their head, or two, that the information is out there in the holographic reality, in the holographic universe, and you're just tuning into that frequency.
Yeah, time isn't real, and what happens is that you have a future and a past that are part of a closed system, and really what you only really truly have is the moment. And what you're trying to do with that moment is change it from profane into sacred. And that is where the moment becomes like breathing. You can control your perception of time with breath control. That means that if it's done correctly, you can achieve a form of martial art that verges on paranormal because you're doing Tai Chi in your experience, and yet you have the precision of Tai Chi, and yet you're doing Hung Gao. And that is a really important one to make, take their martial arts and Quantico up a notch.
And that's something that you trained the SEALs in, correct?
Yeah, you start with straws, and then you go to didgeridoos, and then you do it just like Kill Bill with the Indian flute. Yeah, that's right.
Now I'm curious. As far as I know, mostly it was Navy SEALs, but whether it were SEALs or people from the MARSOC of the Marines, anybody of
well, we did everybody. I did not just Navy SEAls. It was called SEAL Corp. It was eventually led to Navy SEAls, but it was a Blackwater, and we did astronauts and other spooks, and I trained a lot of people in my lab.
Exactly. So out of all of those, I'm just curious, is there any, out of all of the people you had seen and the people that you had trained, were there any traits or common factors as far as certain types of people, maybe blood types or maybe nationalities or maybe regions that they're from?
Beliefs. That's what it came down to in my ESP book. I run it down with a subjective questionnaire. We can find out within just asking you a few questions without testing you, I can put you in the 2% or not right out of the gate.
And what
just
are
because of personal beliefs.
What are some of those questions, or what are some of the factors that give it away?
Do you believe? Do you remember your dreams?
I do.
Yes.
Frequently, occasionally,
Very
or
frequently.
never.
Very
and,
frequently.
Yeah, well, then that's a plus. And there's a whole series of questions that have weighing answers, like this question's worth 6 points and that one's only a half a point, that kind of thing, that we tested 200,000 plebes to come up with about 600 that we had narrowed down.
I want to take this test.
Yeah, just with a test. That's Chapter 3 in ESP. Yep.
Ooh.
And everybody can take it, and we now know who's what. And it's all about beliefs. That's what it all stems from. That chapter is also researched on how we organize the questions so that you can see what the criteria was for the variable. And I have to tell you, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't have believed it.
Exactly. Now, real quick.
Well, imagination is reality. There's no laws in physics. It isn't like that. You make up your universe in the private cavitation ball, and that's why certain individuals have paranormal abilities. It is a divine right. Man is way more than he realizes. And when you realize that there are actually 4 mammals on this planet that are more evolved technically than man, man doesn't have a clue.
Now, which
you take
4
someone
mammals
like orca.
are those? The orcas, okay. The orcas.
Okay, well, cetacean. They're all 4 cetacean that have larger brain cases. Orca has a cerebral cortex that's twice the size of man, and that's crunching power. And that mammal is firing 60% of it. And guess what? It's God. Not our God, but able to go places better designed than humans are for their biosphere. And that mammal chases the next mammal down in the food chain, the bottlenose dolphin. And so it's all about food chain. And that's the way that plays. And you got manatee and pilot whale. But those are the studies I did with John Lilly. The dolphin language that clicks and whistles, like in our man Flint, is a form of Clifford algebra, dimensional math. The redundancy coefficient of that mammal is 10 times more efficient than Hebrew.
Yeah, it's
Abram Moles. I'm sorry?
I said it's very, very complex to the point where, I mean...
Well, it's functional in terms of passing a lot of information in a small burst, way more efficient than Hebrew. I'll tell you, I speak Old Hebrew. the thing is, there's things going on Earth where now even a small, quote, bird brain is more intelligent than we realize, because it's firing its neurons differently than man. And so that means there are certain kinds of directions that we're going to take in our studies of immortality that will include intelligent increase, where you're firing like I am. And what I am is not special. I'm gifted. I have a eidetic memory, blah, blah, blah. But what I am is no different than anybody else. I was just blessed by being 4 years old and never becoming 7.
You know, and I would actually go as far as I think part of the reason
everybody's like, yeah.
I think part of why you are, I mean, your brain is just simply, quite simply, it's just operating at a more efficient rate. And I think probably part of that reason is you just right off the bat, right from the get-go, you understood, whether subconsciously or consciously, how to go with your gut. You know, you didn't.
Well, and that's just one part of it. You know, there's a lot more. It has to do with contingent negative variation, CNV. That's the jump potential between neurons. And you can squirt vasopressin up your nose. That's an anterior pituitary hormone described by Pearson and Shaw, and take someone in Alzheimer and bring them back into true in 10 seconds. When I did it, I had a 25% increase in my memory. And let me tell you, that's enough. And notice there's a difference. And once you've done that for about a year, I don't need to do it again. It's like it rotor-rooters out some of the older crusted neurotransmitters. How did the cockroach general put it in Fat Freddy's cat? Lots more where that came from.
You know, and
a full brain refresh.
I'm curious. Have you ever had what is your IQ? What is it, like 7,000?
They did multibasic MMPI, the other things at Pullman, and determined they couldn't measure it. I was up around 168, 169, and when you get up that high, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Basically, what IQ is really testing, as far as I can tell, is survival coefficient, how quickly you can adapt to a new situation. And intelligence has lots of different levels, because I give it to women and their EQ. Listen, when you deal with emotions are a higher level of information on facts. I mean, once you have the physical pain, how do you feel about it? That is EQ. And that's the emotional pain. The next one would be Plato, is this intellectual concepts of archetypes. And that fourth plane is archetypes. And there are 8 different neurotransmitters that, in terms of the way information folds down into or out of itself, like a fractal, that would be the mathematics that you would use in a holographic system that dealt with information rather than quantum mechanics, which is the Brown space-time.
And that's something I wanted to ask you is, okay, because, quantum physics seemed to have, it's almost like it was, for a minute there, it seemed like that was where everything was at, but now we're kind of realizing that was more of a stepping stone that led us to the realization of the holographic reality. So,
well, that's just the latest one. Maxwell's right-hand rule of thumb is probably the only law in physics that has lasted longer than 20 years.
And can you fully explain that? Can you fully explain that law to our audience?
Well, the right-hand rule, the relationship of electric to magnetic fields. They're the same thing, but they're related, and it's the right-hand rule, where if you move your hand in this direction, your thumb is pointing in the direction of the other field. Now, it's if you have it, that's what an electric motor is, the Earth. And Tesla, that's how Tesla looked at the Earth as an electric motor with brushes, and created electrostatic energies, which are different than alternating currents. 3-phase, whatever. There's different ways of looking at power. The problem with most power is that the energy is being lost like a light bulb in heat. And so you don't say it, and they're not as efficient as an LED, which doesn't have heat. And so what you get in is what you get out. And that's why LEDs are like 10 times more efficient than a light bulb that burns tungsten or whatever. It's just physics is a leading religion of the world today. And if you'll notice, it doesn't have any more truth than your intuition. And so with that, it leads you as a way to go from one place to another, but that's about it. You know, let there be light, and the physicist reached over and turned the switch, and there was light, and it was good. You know, that's what Aleister Crowley wanted to do with his, the Order of the Silver Star. With the aim of religion was a method of science. The integration of the two, like the mind and the body. Religion,
he
however...
talked a lot about the will, too.
Yeah, religion, by the way, is not spirituality. Spirituality is not what you do, but how you do it. Religions, as I see them, for me, are mostly for fellowship, playing baseball, whatever, having someone around that helps me reinforce a belief or trait or value I have that I want to not lose. Now, it's, religions, Rome, there's a movie called Assassin's Creed, and it pretty well runs it down on why the Jesuits went rogue at one. What's that?
It's a video game.
Yeah, it's actually based on a video game.
Too.
Yeah.
And that I've played, and probably you've played too, Gigi.
Absolutely.
And I saw a lot of parallels.
Well, basically, that Roman Catholics turned against their scientists and started burning them at the stake as heretics. And a couple groups, like the Hashishans, got pissed off. And that's what started your so-called Illuminati. Now, today, that term is misused by, calling it the New World Order. Good luck. Mostly, for the last 400 years, there were lodges in Europe that were for the ultra elite towards spirituality. Golden Dawn comes to mind. The one today is Ordo Templi Orientis. There's others. But the problem is most of these bureaucracies, like the Republican Party that has the big cult in Texas, most of them don't know goat turds from pork and beans. They haven't done their homework. They're not Hermetic Kabbalists. That's what I did. I studied under Gershom Scholem. When I came out of graduate school, I got rushed by Bohemian Grove and other creepy places like Skull and Bones because I taught at Harvard. And I have to tell you, I felt like a high school kid going to college, being rushed. And I had to armor up. That's what I did with Missouri Synod Catechism. It wasn't to be religious. It was to protect myself from the environment. And now, if you wanted to know what kind of religion I am, I would probably say I'm an Essene, very much like Christ was, and I tend toward Quakerism. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Now, on that note, for the audience, can you define the Essene?
Essene philosophy is treating others like you treat yourself. It was in India. And India has been around a long time, and they've recycled things to the point where they actually have serious masters. Mine, the one I found, when I came out of grad school, I looked for fine teachers. A teacher can only take you as far as they themselves have gone. And so you want to find the best teacher you can, because that's all the further you're going to get to go. I went out and found a fifth plane mystic. His name was Sharan Singh, and he had a thing called Satmat, Path of the Masters, out of India, up in Bias. I'm a Tatangi. And basically, it is a householder yoga for training the mind. It's not religion, and it's not, cult. And what I did was when he chose me for initiation, he looked me straight in the eye, and he said at the moment of my death that he personally would be there to take me across the abyss. Now, that's a holy man. Yeah, and so that comes out of the Upanishads. and the sound current. The voices of Gaia, the serpent at the end of the rainbow, the lost chord, what Terence McKenna called zero-point energy, that hum. Basically, it leads to soul travel, which is part of the time travel that I'm doing, because soul travel, like astral projection and dreaming, is called the little death, where you go back home for a brief moment to the multiverse. And at the moment of death, that's where you're microtubule, and there's an actual physical weight loss at the moment of death of 2.3 ounces. Nobody figured out what it was, and it was Roger Penrose at Princeton that said it's structured water in a microtubule. That's what your soul is, most likely. It's all in metaphor. I'm writing about that in the non-local mind and how to use your belief systems as tools to change the movie. Everything happens for a reason. Everything leads to something better. Things always work out in the end. If things aren't working out, it's not yet the end. I loved, John Lennon. He was so cool, man. That's one of his. Yeah.
All right, so I've got an interesting question for you. Now, there's kind of two different things I want to get. We've got about 10 minutes left here. I want to get your take on these two different things. One is the proverbial they. For example, especially going back to your work.
They.
Yeah, going back to your work with the MRU and back when you were, they just dropped, for lack of a better term, an alien artifact in front of you and asked you, to determine what it is or how whatever.
Yeah.
But the people that had possession of that artifact. See, here's the thing I'm wondering is, this is one of the things, this is the first part of it, is it seems that these alien artifacts and things that have been reversed engineered in the last 100 years, they always, without exception, just so happen to fall into the hands of the proverbial they. Why is it in such a way to where it seems like they almost must be tracking these things to the point where, like, for example, why isn't average
I like
Joe...
the way Gecko put it in the movie Wall Street. Greed is good.
But
that's what I think, man. I think they're about to hit a brick wall.
Well, but,
and too bad. It's not going. I don't think they're going to have their power structure shortly.
I agree too. But what I'm saying is, just as far as the recent past, why hasn't average Joe that works at 7-Eleven, why hasn't he stumbled across something? Why is it always only?
Well, he did, and what happened is he sold it on eBay. That's probably how it works.
But I mean, it's almost
they find artifacts. A guy finds a giant skull in Pennsylvania, and the Smithsonian picks it up. And I did a video for, it wasn't in search of BBC. They came over to England and they filmed me in a blue room for their thing on artifacts in history that have been somehow misplaced or lost.
Yeah.
There were Nephilim on Earth that were giants, and we're finding those skulls and there are artifacts everywhere. But we found it in the 1800s in Pennsylvania. There's the picture, and it went to the Smithsonian, and now it is, oh gosh, missing. Further down on the Colorado River, down in this one section that is closed off, they found artifacts of a museum by Egypt that was here looking for copper. And there was a Buddha, a gold Buddha there, and that public is not allowed to even have access to that. The skull that's missing from the Smithsonian is easy. The father of those two sons that started it was the Methodist minister that dogged the Mormon, what's his name, Joe Smith, across the country trying to get his flock back when Smith bushwhacked him and started the Mormon culture with his pack. And I think the kids got rid of. I think you'll find those skulls out in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere because they were trying to justify their father. I don't think it was paranormal and nefarious, but there are things that are, and plausible deniability like they do in the movie. I don't know. Why they didn't give me full disclosure was they wanted me to go in clean and do it as I am, a really good scientist isolating variables. Actually, most all of what I did, I still don't have a clue what it means. It's beyond even me, and I'm just along for the ride.
So they were just basically like, here's this thing, figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's going on? What's important? And is it dangerous? And can we use it as a weapon? Kind of like that. Okay. Yeah, it all changed in the 80s. In the 80s, there was no more interest in blue sky research where you didn't know where you were going to go. If it did not have application, it was not funded. That's one of the reasons I went back into agriculture and became a mountain man out in the country.
Yeah, and now, and real quick, for the last thing I want to get at tonight, there's more I wanted to get to my first part, but we can expand on that later. So here's something that I think you must have, assuredly, you must have experience with this kind of experience. Now, it's going to take me about a minute or two to build up to this, but I know you will fully understand. And that is this. Whenever I'm in my life, I've found, whenever I'm involved in things that are more globally relevant, for example, several years ago, I worked for a corporation that was not only they were developing artificial technology and new ways to use it, and specifically, I was involved in, I was helping them sell this artificial technology to different major corporations, anything from major TV networks to major online, to people like Facebook and whatnot, which we know, Facebook now uses, there's a little shift that's happening. Instead of using cookies on the internet, they're now using artificial intelligence instead. And I was part of that very loosely, but I was a part of that whole that transformation of instead of relying on cookies, basically trying to implement artificial intelligence and trying to use it practically. And so there's a lot of really interesting, crazy things that happened during my time being involved with artificial intelligence, something that is so relevant and important to today's world, and will be even more important and relevant in the coming years. But so I've mentioned this before, probably on another episode, but here's an analogy that will perfectly explain my point, and I want to get your take on why these things happen and who these people are. So let's say you wake up one morning, right? And you're doing your morning routine, you're brushing your teeth, you're shaving, whatever. But let's say, usually you put on a pair of slippers, right? But let's say that morning you didn't put your pair of slippers on, and then you went into the restroom to go shave and brush your teeth, and then you stubbed your toe on the sink, right? And it caught, let's say you broke your toenail by stubbing it on the sink, right? And so you think,
okay,
man, if I would have worn my slipper, that wouldn't have happened, right? But, that happened to you, so you carry on your day. And let's say by the time you leave your house, you get to the coffee shop or wherever your first stop is, and then, you sit down and have your coffee, and let's say a random person, a completely random stranger, comes up to you and says something like this: "Hey, probably should have wore your slippers this morning, huh?"
Ah!
That, and that's my question. Who is that? Who are they? Who is that person?
That can somehow instinctually know something that no one could possibly know, except something that... Okay, that's called mentalism. Yes. It's different than... it's a pipe of flim-flam where there are all kinds of possible ways they got their information that you have not yet isolated as a variable, like he heard you talking to somebody first, and you didn't notice him there. Now, that's one thing that could happen, and you didn't think of that, but that is a high probability of one way they glean it. I think, who's that comedian that plays the banjo? Saturday Night Live guy, yeah.
Sandler.
No. Funnier than Sandler. Sandler's newer. This is Steve Martin. Steve Martin.
Oh, okay.
Did a movie on a flim flam that would use a holy roller where they go through an audience and have that psychic-like person, and you lost your job today because of not, where they have a team unknowing to you that are probing the audience as the audience is sitting there and reading different things. It's called mentalism. And that is one possibility. The second is he's a Jack Schwartz from, Aquarian Martin, what was his name at Aquarian Foundation? There was a famous psychic that we studied from Seattle that was Reinhardt, Keith Milton Reinhardt. Now, that guy was psychic. I did a class at the UW one time. I had 102 students. That means he came in and he did a billet reading for each one. My question was, you write it on a piece of paper. He doesn't see the piece of paper. And then what he does is he answers your question. My paper said, give me an example where you're not reading my mind. And his thing to me was, there is a hope chest in your mother's bedroom, and at the bottom is an envelope there that was written before you were born. She never told you about it, and in that envelope it will say da-da-da. Now, that is pretty creepy. And I've seen that, and that's the kind of thing I did for the military. Jack Schwartz, Alethea Foundation here, he was out of Portland at the time. We brought him into the Manager Foundation, Elmer Green's place in Topeka, and I set up laboratories. He could stick a pin, a needle, through his arm and stop the bleeding. If you don't think the military didn't want to know how that worked, I'll tell you. Well, yeah, okay, that's what I did, that kind of thing, trying to figure out how it worked. Never did get much there, but, that journey was interesting. I was the one that busted Geller. Geller was my teacher's protege. He was Andrea Puharich, and Puharich was a genius, but I caught Geller cheating. And Geller could do paranormal things, but what happened was he was starting to hob with wealthy women and gigglies and whatever, and, groupies, and they would want him to perform one for them, bend my watch, and he would cheat and do it. And I caught him, and that took all of Puharich's work with him and made it invalid. It was a real shame because Geller was the real deal. Andrea Puharich was possibly the finest parapsychologist ever, in my opinion, and he was my teacher. And I have to say that Geller, it happens. And like back in the 70s, it wasn't Russia that was behind the Iron Curtain. It was Czechoslovakia. And they had a bunch of thugs from Bulgaria rushing around the scientists, creeping them out. That's why they defected. And Russia, at that time, not today, was superstitious. They had Kalugina and all these weird people, moving things with their mind on the piece of, holding her hand over it and it'd start moving. She had a magnet underneath it. And that just stupid stuff, But every once in a while, there was something that was really real. And that's when it got really interesting. Dowsing, water witching, finding oil, finding water, that kind of thing. Pendulum things where they can do a reading. What they're doing, that's called radiesthesia. It's one of the 5 different groupings of ESP where you use an external object to communicate to consciousness something you already know, like a pendulum, the tarot cards, throwing the bones, that kind of thing.
Yeah, man. You know, I could sit here and talk to you for about 17 hours straight and still not get enough. And, you know.
I know. It gets cool. I enjoy sharing because when I do, believe this or not, I'm learning just like you. I get things by teaching. It is a joy. That's how I used to learn something. I was first faculty at Evergreen, taught witchcraft. Can you imagine physicists teaching witchcraft? Aguila was next door doing mandalas. Oh, it's great, man. And I learned by teaching.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you know what? Okay, well, let's see. All right, yeah, we're probably
we're good for another weekend. We're good to go. This was fun, and we'll do more as you need it. Not a problem.
And that will do it for tonight's episode. Stay tuned for part 3 with Doc Graham next week. And in the meantime, check out our next episode with Ronnie LeBlanc, author of Monsterland. All right, everybody. For the Fringe FM, this is Shift Happens. And on behalf of Cortana and myself, cheers, everybody.
Bye.